Yeah, he's one of the early trunks, him and Otis. Cool.
Are you ready?
No, I noticed him.
悪いな。遠慮つけてやる。ほらさっさと終わらせるぞ。それくらいだ。遅い。さっさと終わる。そらそこだ。何のやつだな。それ行くぞ。まだか。まだ使い切っちゃった。
Yeah, you can DP that.
これから見せるのが本当の力だ。この攻撃だ。しつこいやつだな。見えているか。やっそれしつこい。よし今だ。ほら見えているか。まだか。超えることはできる。これ以上好きにさせるぞ。お前はもう終わりだ。どこへ行くんだ。
For this particular set, this one is
It's all or nothing. まだせい。見えているか。あいつはオラがくらいだ。遅い。そらくらいだ。生きれるか。楽にそれほらよっそんなもんか。もっと本気で来い。よっほらなんだとほらもっと本気で来い。なめんじゃね悪いな。遅いぞ。どこへ行くんだ。プレゼントだ。死ね。何なんだ。クズめ。使い切っちゃった。俺が撃ってやる。 遅いぞ。遊びは終わ
Oh, I just know that situation with UI because I laughed a lot of UI that way I knew how to fight him. I just got sick and tired of seeing this fucking girl. I have to laugh in order to do anything in this game. Damn it. That's one of the footsteps. I use it during my birthday. As long as I gotta do one. I'm a guy that promotes kind of respectfully, but I don't practice what I preach. No, in this whole flipping thing, he's gonna say it's in this whole His auto combo can whiff sometimes.
Are you ready? 遅い。よっ。これまでだ。よし、今だ。それ。それ。受け取れ。遅い。ほら。受け取れ。それ。ほら。それ。ほら。受け取れ。ついてこれるか。任せろ。ほら。受け取れ。見えているか。くらいだ。そら。あいつはオーラがついてる。そら。この野郎ビビだ。次の一発でお前は確実に消滅する。まだか。ほら。よし、今だ。少ないな。遅い。それだ。まだか。ほら。消えてやがれ。使い切っちまった。俺が撃ってやるぞ。どうした。これまでだ。そんなもんかよ。やってくれるクイズ。なめんじゃねえぞ。ここめだ。どこへ行くんだ。雑だ。プレゼントだ。信じろ。なめんじゃねえ。こっちはどこへ行くんだ。なめんじゃねえ。どうしたの。どこへ行くんだ。だから見せるのが本当の力だ。行くぞ。あいつはオーラが食い止める。オーラでも知らんぞ。行くぞ。行けた。プレゼントだ。
It's a lot. Like, your points are really good. A lot more
願して遅いぜ。手伝うぞ。終わりじゃねえか。そんなもんかよ。いきますよ。これが俺の全力です。使い切っちまった。今度は俺が行けば。オラに任せろ。
Listen. I was trying to delay wake up. Ready?
相手です。いきますよ。これが俺の全力です。油断してたぜ。ほらくらいだ。遅い。それくらいだ。そらしつこいやつだな。そこだ。ほらくらいだ。避けてみな。さっさとほらそれまだ勝負はついてねえぞ。そこだ。遅い。ほらくらいだ。あいつ行くぞ。まだか。まだか。そらさっさとそらそれ見えているか。それ生きれるか。そこだ。さっさと終わらせるぞ。これから見せるのが本当の力だ。それ楽にしてやる。この攻撃からあいつはオラが食い止める。見えているか。ほらそらこれまでだ。見えているか。消えてるんだ。あがいても無駄だ。よし今だ。遅い。それくらいだ。くらいだ。生きれるか。そうきたか。やるじゃないか。あいつは俺が食い止める。これ以上好きにさせんぞ。お前はもう終わりだ。完全に消えそうですね。楽しめそう。どこへ行くんだ。ちでやプレゼントだ。
Take you out of that situation.
お前たちが戦う意志を見せなければ俺はこの星を破壊す。貴様は俺が倒す。菓子を作ろうとしてもそれはか。
Yeah. Back on over to Destiny this morning following the rendezvous and the wrap up on the stream for the matches. I'm going to go on ahead and start with the team's systematic breakdown for each team that I used in each set per segment, leading to the general closing stage match using my predominant team as well as Blazeyeo's main team. I'm going to take a minute to try and recollect a lot of what was happening while it's still fresh in my head. Anyway, while it's still fresh in my head. So let's begin. This was the debut of my latest Base Goku team shell, and the return of one of my earliest characters from my early journeys in the competitive scene of Dragon Ball Z's FGC scene. This competitive team composition was built last month to not only bring my Videl back into the general competitive scene, but to also attempt to wield UI Goku, Ultra Instinct Goku, for the very first time since his release week. His release week, and maybe a week afterwards, was the last time I actually took an interest in playing UI Goku, and then I never really did anything. In my case, it was a smarter starting point of view using him than just mashing UI's general privileged buttons just because I could. If I wasn't in the mood or patient, then yeah, sure, I'd probably be more inclined to mash than block. While both characters are a learning curve of sorts in this new team, I feel Videl is on the shorter end of that stick due to the need of knowing better combos to make the most of her openings and her options. Optimizing Videl play comes from base neutral and being pretty nimble to boot, thus creating her openings. From what I saw through a lot of that match, I believe I still need a lot more Videl before it can become normally established in how to play. That opening segment cost me a really good potential lead off. I lost that match, I think 4 or 5-0 straight flush in the opener. As for Ultra Instinct Goku, I have no clue how his neutral actually functions. Watching Saiken, I have a good enough idea that's helped in fighting UI players better, but not too big of an idea to play UI until I actually do it. To have the hands-on experience, essentially. It's possible that I might need to play UI in the way of abusing his privileged tools more than I may or may not have to make up for the slack of neutral tools in the whole team's alternate options for different matchups and knowing future matchups if I go up against another UI player, which is highly common, or Base Goku player. The coming continuation of national tournaments for US East and West and Spain will help me lab out better UI neutral from watching him at higher tier gameplay where he's likely going to be abused more. I'm sure to see him enough as viable as he is for any team pool. He gives any team added neutral. It's his neutral game itself that's not so easily understood by me. I remember someone telling me about his 5L being a really good tool as fast as it is, so I need to keep that in mind to see how 5L plays into a neutral game for UI Goku. While not my first choice to use in a serious matchup for obvious reasons, the Zamasu team was another set team on the side that was more or less ready at any time I would need of it. It's a viable team, weirdly enough. I can still play decently enough with a decent amount of neutral knowledge. I found it weird that the very team I disowned is the same reason why I was able to not just gain points on the board, but also gain a solid comeback into the gameplay. It's really stupid. As much as I hate Zamasu, I suppose even he still has his actual uses from time to time in applying his own pros and cons relevant to neutral tools, in addition to the movement-based neutral tools in gameplay. Just happen to work in some type of miraculous favor. Outside better Vegito play and character knowledge of Vegito, I personally have nothing of note for this team overall to better upon, as I stopped giving a fuck about it. I care about the team when I don't really use that team anymore. I care about how Vegito can potentially give me Spirit Bomb Oki, if that's even possible for him to do properly on his own. More complete character that can defend himself and seems to stagger players relatively easily for no mixing options available to him beyond that point. And then lastly was my main team that came into the mix during the closing segment, the closing act, against his predominant team, which was his main team. Essentially the base team he was using at the beginning in the opening bout against the Videl team, which in a sense also revealed him as being a very prosperous Trunks main. Taking into consideration his bar management, frame trap setups, and timely use of Spark past the first character, it makes sense looking back at the matches why or how he could be a Trunks player. A good takeaway from this match overall, looking at his team, is how to approach Trunks players, because this was a very fine example of how to try to take avid note of fighting Trunkses. Everything about Trunks plays off momentum, and he thrives off of offensive pressure and mix-up potential. Thus, the sparking plays to him in order to create his own X factor. His block strings, he can't true block strings into safe block string enders without gaps in between his stuff. Kai Blast whiffs. He has mass mobility. He has very good left-right 50-50s. Very weird spacing control. He has decent reach on his normals, but I noticed that most of his normals are actually unsafe, which it makes it harder for him to stagger without sacrificing space, which you'd have to cover by using likely 214X. But it can allow him to restore assists at the same time in trying to sacrifice that space, which isn't a bad thing, but it requires a bit of bar and assist micromanagement, I feel. There isn't much else I can think after that. Granted, I played my hand at Trunks myself for a pretty good amount of time, but I haven't actually sat there to try to main him for long periods of time, so fighting a Trunks main of this caliber on high level is very different and more educational right now than if I were to just play him on Trunks team that I have. I'll keep all these factors in mind as I potentially likely have another rematch with Blazeyeo down the line, or another Trunks player. For any of the questions, comments, or concerns, by all means leave them down below in the comments section. I'll read them when I can. You'll always hear from me when you hear from me. I'm going to get ready to get back to work here on Destiny before long, so as always, thank you for tuning in. Till all are